Alright, let's end this. How many times have I seen the end? How many times have I said, this is my final combo, this is my last combo? Just how many times have I retired? Like, this is getting ridiculous. So, this is the Storm combo, previously known as the Melancholia combo. Now, the lore behind this combo is that I did it in October, I think, and it was supposed to be a replication of one of Worry Nuri's combos. I think it was supposed to be his Doppelganger combo 27 or something, I'm not sure. And I failed miserably. I could not do it. And I saw one setup, there were like a few setups that I was able to combine, and I improvised. So basically, at the end of that combo by Worry Nuri, he uses the Doppelganger's Yamato combo B to blow the enemy away towards Vergil, and then the heavy rain blades that had been preset, literally at the beginning of the combo, they freeze the enemy in time, and Vergil, who was doing the this shall be your grave taunt, I think, he does Judgment Cut End. It was a beautiful combo, it was a work of art, but it went nowhere for me. I was not able to replicate it at all. So, I tried to improvise with Yamato combo A, and the best I could come up with was, well, this. The Melancholia combo. The end of this combo is basically, I catch the enemy with Void Slash and use Rapid Slash, and then, you know, the Doppelganger that I summoned uses Void Slash, and then I use 3 Trig Downs, and I use the Kata taunt, and then oh my god, it looks ridiculous, alright? It was supposed to be inspired by Worry Nuri and also by one of Byakuya and Akuma's combos, but in that combo by Byan, the Doppelganger uses Yamato combo A and Vergil uses Judgment Cut End, but that is only possible because he uses EMV, right? He has mods. In the game, like in the base game, if you try to use any super move, any ultimate, like, you know, Judgment Cut End, the Doppelganger gets deactivated, so I was not able to do that, obviously. All in all, I was not very satisfied with the Melancholia combo, and a few of my friends said as much themselves. They were like, yeah, it looks kind of weird. But I really had nothing to do. I'd been pondering, I've been tinkering with the idea of somehow doing something with it, modifying it, changing it, but I was out of setups. Until now, or well, until a few weeks ago, or however many days ago, I don't know when I'm going to be uploading this video. So, this combo consists of 3 setups. The first setup is by my good friend Melancholic Levy. The moment I saw this setup back in October, I was like, I am definitely stealing this. Like, I have to replicate this, it looks so cool. Fun fact, I might be misremembering, but I think that he came up with this setup by accident while freestyling, so that's a bit of lore there. The second setup is, this is our setup. No one really knows who came up with this setup, but I know Beyond used it, I know V uses it a lot, like V Gaming. Just a lot of people, a lot of Doppelganger players have used this setup at least once. Or maybe I'm tripping, I don't know. So, I don't know who did this setup where, you know, the Doppelganger uses Yamato combo C and Vergil uses Cindy T Beowulf combo B, so it doesn't really matter. And the final setup, the third and final setup, which is, I would say, by far the highlight of the combo and the most interesting setup, is by my good friend Cad. It's from his Abyss combo final retake. I remember the first time I saw the Abyss combo, I was like, I'm gonna replicate this, but at the time, I was kind of retired for the 874th time, and I was kind of out of setups that I could implement, you know what I mean, like, I was just burnt out, I had no combos that I could add that setup into, if you know what I mean, but now things are different, and I finally remembered this setup. So, yeah, these are some really good setups, and I would say this is one of my better combos, one of my best combos Not to flex, but that's simply how I feel. So let's start analyzing this combo. So before you start this combo, you got to have the Stormblades active. So Stormblades, you already know, it's this attack where the Mirage Blades surround the enemy. It's back plus holding the Mirage Blade button, and when you release the Mirage Blade button, the Stormblades, they will launch the enemy into the air. If you're on the left side, it's left plus holding the Mirage Blade button. In my case, the Mirage Blade button is the right mouse button. And for this setup, you gotta keep holding the Mirage Blade button. So I have my finger on my right mouse button throughout this entire setup until it's time to release the Stormblades and launch the enemy into the air. By the way, the same exact thing happens in the final setup of this combo. You gotta have the Stormblades active and you gotta keep holding the Mirage Blade button until the very end of the setup. That is the reason why I named this combo, well, Storm Combo. It's not because Vergil is the Storm that is a pro. No, it's because you use Stormblades twice. And I don't think I've had a combo so far where you gotta use Stormblades twice. I could be wrong though, so I don't know. Anyway, you gotta keep holding the Stormblades and you gotta have the Yamato equipped. And now you use Rising Star. And now you summon the haste version of the Doppelganger and you switch to Beowulf. Now you use Starfall, but you press the left plus attack button and you immediately release the lock-on and you use Trick Up to cancel Starfall, alright? So, why do you press left plus attack button when using Starfall? Starfall is just pressing the attack button once in the air with Beowulf. However, the Doppelganger can only use the Yamato, not Beowulf, and he copies your commands. He's on the left side in midair with the Yamato. When you are on the left side in midair with the Yamato and you press left plus attack button, that is aerial cleave. So the Doppelganger will use aerial cleave when you press left plus attack button while using Starfall. Okay? That's basically how it works. Now that you've used Starfall, you cancel it by letting go of the lock-on and using Trick Up, okay? And now you switch to the Mirage Edge and you lock on again, and you press left plus attack button to use Air Stinger, right? So you want to use Air Stinger. And now you lock on again, and you press left plus right plus attack button. This will cause Vergil to use Helmbreaker with the Mirage Edge, and the Doppelganger to use Void Slash. Now, why is that? Helmbreaker with the Mirage Edge is just pressing the attack button once in midair. However, you want the Doppelganger to use Void Slash. The Doppelganger is on the left side, on the ground, and he can only use the Yamato. If you want to use Void Slash with the Yamato, and you're on the left side on the ground, you gotta press left plus right plus attack button. So, instead of simply pressing the attack button during Helmbreaker, you gotta press left plus right plus attack button so that the Doppelganger can use Void Slash, alright? And, one thing I forgot, so, let's go over this again. Use Rising Star, you summon the haste version of the Doppelganger, you switch to Beowulf. You press the left plus attack button to use Starfall, the Doppelganger uses aerial cleave. You let go of the lock-on, like I said, you use Trick Up, now you switch to the Mirage Edge, you lock on again and use Air Stinger, left plus attack button, and now once again, you let go of the lock-on. Now you lock on again, and you press left plus right plus attack button. Vergil uses Helmbreaker, the Doppelganger uses Void Slash. Now you let go of the lock-on again, alright? So that you can use Trick Up immediately after hitting the ground with Helmbreaker. Now you lock on again, alright? You lock on again, and you once again use Air Stinger, which is right plus attack button, and you deactivate the Doppelganger. The thing here, though, is that you also have to hold the attack button for a very long time while using Air Stinger. The reason being, you want to use Roundtrip, so you keep holding the attack button while using Air Stinger, and when your Mirage Edge starts glowing, you release the attack button to use Roundtrip. Roundtrip is holding the attack attack button with the Mirage Edge for a very long time, and when it starts glowing, you release the attack button. Okay? Now you finally let go of the Mirage Blade button, and you release the Storm Blade simultaneously. So you release the attack button, and you release the Mirage Blade button. In my case, I release both the left click and the right click. You know, both left and right mouse button. And basically what happens is the Storm Blades launch the enemy directly into the air, and they get caught by the Roundtrip. Once you've used Roundtrip, you switch to Beowulf, and you use Starfall. Now you immediately use Trig Down, you summon the haste version of the Doppelganger, and you simultaneously go into your Sin Double Trigger, okay? And now you switch to the Yamato, and this is incredibly important. You press back plus attack button to use Rapid Slash. Make sure that you don't wait for the Doppelganger to fully form. If you wait for the Doppelganger to fully form, he will use Rapid Slash with you. You want to basically use Rapid Slash, you want to press back plus attack button while the Doppelganger is still a blur, before he is fully formed. Otherwise, he will use Rapid Slash with you. Alright? So, like I said, Sin DT, you summon the haste version of the Doppelganger, and before he's fully formed, you switch to the Yamato, and you press back plus attack button to use Rapid Slash. Before I analyze this second setup, I gotta say, maybe you're a little confused because the enemy is on the ground here. Ignore that completely and only pay attention to the inputs. Basically, there is an example where the enemy was being cut up by the Roundtrip and everything was perfect, but I pressed the attack button 6 times in that example. It all worked out perfectly, but I think it's not very accurate. I'll explain later. For now, don't pay attention to the fact that the enemy is on the ground. Pretend that they're being cut up by the Roundtrip. The whole point of this setup is, while the enemy is being cut up by the Roundtrip, right, you use all of this, and then the Roundtrip goes back to Vergil, and the enemy falls to the ground, and before hitting the ground, the Doppelganger catches them with the slash flurry of Yamato combo C. But here, in this example that we're analyzing, the enemy is already on the ground. Like I said, completely ignore that. It has no bearing on this setup. At this point, and this is incredibly important, pay very close attention, you switch to Beowulf, you release the lock-on, so you let go of the lock-on, and you keep holding back or down. In my case, I press and hold S. This will cause Vergil to face you, to face the screen. This is what you want. So now that you've let go of the lock-on, now that you're holding back, and now that you're switched to Beowulf, now you do the following. You want the Doppelganger to use Yamato combo C, and you want Vergil to use Sin DT Beowulf combo B. So what happens here essentially is the Doppelganger blows the enemy away towards Vergil with the final hit of Yamato combo C, and Vergil catches the enemy with this Tetsu Zanko, the final hit of Sin DT Beowulf combo B, where he spreads his wings. But how exactly does this work? So, let's explain how Yamato combo C works and how Beowulf combo B works. So, Yamato combo C is you press the attack button 4 to 5 times, sometimes even 6, but for the purposes of this combo, let's say it's 4 times. You press the attack button 4 times, Vergil does the first 4 hits of Yamato combo C, then you make a pause, and then you just continue to mash the attack button, and Vergil will use the slash flurry. Alright? So, 4 hits, pause, mash. Okay? How does Beowulf combo B work? Beowulf combo B is, and let me explain how it works. See, Beowulf combo B consists of 5 hits. However, this doesn't mean that you just gotta press the attack button 5 times. See, you can see there are 5 hits, and this, kick flurry, this kick barrage, is actually 1 press of the attack button. However, it doesn't have to be. You can mash. So, how do you do Beowulf combo B? What's the perfect way to do it? You press the attack button 4 times, then you make a pause, and then you just continue to mash like a maniac, and then during the final hit, you press and hold the attack button, and you charge it, and you only release it when the enemy is close to you. Alright? So, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to this combo, you could say that Yamato combo C and Beowulf combo B have identical inputs. The reason for that is Beowulf is not as responsive as the Yamato. It's a very heavy weapon. It requires multiple inputs. In order for you to do the first 2 hits of Beowulf combo B, you gotta press the attack button 4 times, sometimes even 5 times, you know? But you gotta do it fast. So that's how it works. Whereas with the Yamato, you press the attack button 4 times, he does 4 hits, right? That's how it works. So, like I said, both Beowulf combo B and Yamato combo C have almost identical inputs. Not exactly, the pauses aren't really the same length, but let's ignore that for now. So again, you use Rapid Slash, you release the lock-on, you switch to Beowulf, and you keep holding back, alright? Now, you press the attack button 4 times very fast, and this will cause Vergil to use the first 2 hits of Beowulf combo B, and it will cause the Doppelganger to use the first 4 hits of Yamato combo C. And now you make a pause, alright? Because this pause is required for both combos. Now, you press and mash the attack button after the pause, and Vergil will use this kick flurry, and the Doppelganger will use the slash flurry. At this point, you press and hold right. So you stop holding back, you start holding right, and you keep mashing. Now Vergil will use the penultimate hit of Beowulf combo B, which is this punch. And now you stop holding right, and you lock on, and you start holding the attack button, alright? So that Vergil can charge the Tetsuzanko, the final hit of Beowulf combo B. At this point, the Doppelganger will finish Yamato combo C and blow the enemy away towards Vergil. When you notice that the enemy is very close to Vergil, you release the attack button, and Vergil will use the final hit of Beowulf combo B. At this point, the Doppelganger will use a Judgment Cut to keep the enemy airborne. Now, why is that? It's incredibly simple. You are pressing and holding the attack button to use the final hit of Beowulf combo B to charge it, and then you released it. So let's look at the Doppelganger's perspective, because the Doppelganger copies your commands. So what he did was he did Yamato combo C, and he was holding the attack button during the last hit, and then when he released it, he used the Judgment Cut. Because when you press and hold the attack button with the Yamato, and then you release it, that is a Judgment Cut. So that's why this happens, essentially. This is really simple. I don't really think I need to explain anything. All you need to know is you gotta let go of the lock-on and keep holding back. And then you press the attack button 4 times, you make a pause, then you resume mashing while holding back. Vergil does the kick flurry, the Doppelganger does the slash flurry, then you start holding right, not back, but right, and then you keep mashing and eventually you start holding the attack button. Now, why do you have to hold right during the penultimate hit of Beowulf combo B? Why is this so important? Because 99% of the time, if you keep holding back, if you don't redirect, if you don't go right before the final hit of Beowulf combo B, the combo will fail. Because during this setup, for some reason, Vergil and the Doppelganger are almost always going to be misaligned. You know what I mean? That's what's going to happen. And you need to solve this. You need to realign Vergil and the Doppelganger by pressing right, you know, and then this will happen. You get what I mean. Not always, though, but 99% of the time this is the case. So now that the Doppelganger has finished using this Judgment Cut, and now that Vergil is done with Beowulf combo B, you switch to the Yamato, and you use Void Slash to catch the enemy. And you also deactivate the Doppelganger. And that is the end of the second setup. Alright, so now we have the third and final setup of this combo. And before I start analyzing this setup, there are 4 or 5 things that I gotta get out of the way first before I actually start with the analysis of this setup. Believe me, you'll thank me later because I really think it's better and safer to get all this out of the way. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is Vergil's Judgment Cut mechanic. Now, I'm going to be retreading a lot of ground from my Vergil Doppelganger guide. This is really basic stuff, but I gotta get it out of the way. So, you already know that when you have the Yamato and you press and hold the attack button and then you release it, Vergil will use a Judgment Cut. But you also have a perfect Judgment Cut. This happens when you press and hold the attack button and you release it at just the right time. You know? Every single move that Vergil has with the Yamato has a perfect Judgment Cut window, or several windows. Like Aerial Cleave has 2 windows. Rapid Slash has 2 windows. You can release the attack button as soon as the sword hits the scabbard and you see the click, and sometimes you can do it before that. You gotta learn the timing. If you know anything about Vergil, you know how this works. Even with the Mirage Edge, for example, Mirage Edge Combo B or Deep Stinger, you can use the perfect Judgment Cut at the end of these moves. So you have perfect Judgment Cuts, and you can also use 3 perfect Judgment Cuts in a row. You can extend this with Trig Down. You have a lot of things, like you can use this quadruple Judgment Cut, but not the jackpot one. It's the one where you can use Trick Up and Trig Down, like this, as you can see here. There are a lot of things you can do with the Judgment Cut mechanic, but none of that matters for this combo in particular. What matters is this. You know that when the Doppelganger is active, let's say he's on the other side of the map. If you press and hold the attack button with the Yamato, and then you release it, Vergil does a regular Judgment Cut. What happens is the Doppelganger does the same thing. He also does a regular Judgment Cut, and he will do it from his own position. However, if you have that perfect timing, and you use the perfect Judgment Cut at the right time, the Doppelganger will also use the perfect Judgment Cut, and he will teleport to where Vergil is. Every time you use a perfect Judgment Cut with the Doppelganger active, he will teleport to where Vergil is to use that perfect Judgment Cut. We've had combos where we would deliberately avoid this, like the ice combo, where you want the Doppelganger to stay in his own lane, if you know what I mean. But with this combo, that's not what we want. So anyway, we all know that the Doppelganger can only use the Yamato. He can't use Beowulf, and he can't use the Mirage Edge. However, this is one thing that is incredibly important, and I have not mentioned this in my Doppelganger guide, which I regret. I should modify it. So, see, the Doppelganger reacts to your inputs. We've already talked about this. For example, if I use, I don't know, like, high time with the Mirage Edge, and I'm on the left side, that's the left plus attack button. But the Doppelganger will use upper slash, because with the Yamato, left plus attack button is upper slash. So he copies your commands. And the same thing applies to Judgment Cuts. See, let's take Beowulf for example. You know how with Beowulf, you can charge every hit up to 3 times. Well, did you know that when, like, you know, because when you charge the attack for the first time, you see this spark, you see this glow, and you hear this sound. Did you know that if you hold the attack button and release it at the right time, just as your Beowulf attack has been charged, the Doppelganger will respond to that, and he will use a perfect Judgment Cut. And he can do it infinitely. He can do it 4 times in a row, 5 times in a row. Here, with Beowulf Combo B, what I did was, I press and hold the attack button and I release it just as the Beowulf attack starts getting charged. And then I do it again, and again, and again, and look at the result. the Doppelganger does several perfect judgment cuts. However, if my timing is off, if I don't release the attack button in time, the Doppelganger will simply use a regular judgment cut. He won't teleport to where I am, you know? And the same thing goes for the Mirage Edge. Here you can see how I am mashing with the Mirage Edge, but I keep pressing and holding the attack button and then releasing it. I press and hold it, then release it. So what I'm essentially doing is I am using a judgment cut. You know how you can use 3 perfect judgment cuts in a row? The Doppelganger will copy that. My timing when charging Beowulf and releasing it, my timing when charging the Mirage Edge, when mashing with it, is the same as when I used, the perfect judgment cut. The Doppelganger responds to this. He sees press, hold, release, press, hold, release, press, hold, release, and he does perfect judgment cuts, essentially. The timing is not the same, I'm kind of lying, but the principle is, alright? I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So, what happens here? Did you know that when you use Air Stinger, which is right plus attack button, you can hold the attack button, right? And if you release it just as you're about to finish Air Stinger, like you hit this invisible wall, the Doppelganger will use a perfect judgment cut. And then if you use Helmbreaker, and you press and hold the attack button, and then you release it when you hit the ground, the Doppelganger will do another perfect judgment cut. So what did you do? You pressed and held the attack button during Air Stinger. When you were done with Air Stinger, you released it. The Doppelganger said, press, hold, release, that's a perfect judgment cut. Then you use Helmbreaker, which is pressing and holding the attack button. The moment you reach the ground, you release the attack button. The Doppelganger says, oh, press, hold, release again. That's another perfect judgment cut. Alright? This is what I mean. The Doppelganger can respond to you pressing and holding and releasing the attack button consecutively, and he will respond to it by using perfect judgment cuts. Maker T has a combo, Vergil combo 12 if I'm not mistaken, where he makes perfect use of this mechanic, which I have never used up until this point, but I've been needing to. The reason I'm even talking about this is because in this combo, when you use Air Stinger, you gotta hold the attack button, and when you hit the invisible wall, when you're done with Air Stinger, you let go of the attack button, and Vergil's Doppelganger will teleport to where you are, and he will use a perfect judgment cut to suspend the enemy in the air. Okay, that's about it for that. Now I want to talk about reversals. You already know that when you're on the right side, in midair with the Mirage Edge, pressing the attack button is Helmbreaker. However, if you want to use a reverse Helmbreaker, what you want to do is you want to let go of the lock-on, you want to press and hold right, and you want to press the attack button. So it's not just the attack button, it's letting go of the lock-on, pressing right, and pressing the attack button. That's how it works. That's how you do a reverse Helmbreaker when you're on the right side. What about Roundtrip, though? Roundtrip is pressing and holding the attack button with the Mirage Edge, holding it for about a second and a half, and when it starts glowing, you release it, and Vergil will unleash this circular sword. However, if you want to use a reverse Roundtrip that will not hit the enemy, but will go in the opposite direction, let's say you're on the right side, what you want to do is the same principle as with the reverse Helmbreaker. You press and hold the attack button, right? And then you press and hold right, and then you release the attack button, and Vergil will use this reverse Roundtrip. So in both of these cases, what you want to do is you want to let go of the lock-on, hold right, and press the attack button, or press, hold, release the attack button. You can see this right now on the screen. Alright, and finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the void slash glitch. So, you guys probably remember the overdrive combo. I've renamed it to divine combo. In that combo, I make use of the void slash glitch. The way void slash works, as you guys already know, is you press back plus forward plus attack button, Vergil catches the enemy with the slash, and when he sheathes his sword, this explosion will kind of damage the enemy, right? So it's not just a void slash that can damage and catch enemies and prevent them from falling to the ground, it's also the void slash explosion. Think overdrive combo, think void combo, eclipse combo, infernal combo. In all of these combos, we have instances where it's not the void slash that prevents the enemy from falling to the ground, it's the void slash explosion that prevents the enemy from falling to the ground. So, what is the void slash glitch? This is a glitch that happens when you use the void slash and immediately after using it, you cancel it, preferably with trig down, and you use a taunt, preferably the lock-on taunt. What's going to happen is Vergil will cancel Void Slash with trig down and immediately use a taunt. The Void Slash will keep the enemy airborne, but then it will disappear. And then, about 2 seconds later, the Void Slash explosion will appear and it will catch the enemy. Usually you want to use the Stormblades. Like, look at how I did it in the Overdrive slash Divine combo. Like, I cancel it, I use Stormblades, I use the lock-on taunt. The enemy falls and is actually intercepted by this Phantom Slash. Some people are calling this the Phantom Slash. Most commonly, it's known as the Void Slash Explosion Glitch, or just Void Slash Glitch. But if you think Phantom Slash sounds cooler, sure. However, this is not the only way to trigger this glitch. There is another way. See, instead of canceling Void Slash by using trig down and using the lock-on taunt, you can simply use the Void Slash and immediately cancel it by switching to Beowulf and using Hell on Earth. It will have the same exact effect, completely identical. So there are two ways to trigger this Void Slash explosion glitch, the Phantom Slash, alright? Now what happens in this combo actually, in this part of the setup? What happens is, I use Void Slash to catch the enemy, I use Hell on Earth, I charge it, and then the Stormblades launch the enemy into the air. The enemy is about to fall to the ground, but the Phantom Slash, the Void Slash explosion, grazes them, and it prevents them from falling to the ground. And then they are about to resume falling to the ground, but the reverse round trip comes back to Vergil like a boomerang, and it grazes the enemy, further preventing them from falling to the ground. And by that time, Vergil hits the ground with Hell on Earth and explodes everything. Remember how in the blue combo we had something similar, but with Judgment Cut End? I charge Judgment Cut End, and as the enemy is about to fall to the ground, the round trip comes back to Vergil, and that process of the round trip coming back to Vergil like a boomerang, it grazes the enemy, and it basically prevents them from falling to the ground. Alright, so now with all that out of the way, we can finally start the analysis. Psych! Not yet. So, there's one thing I gotta do beforehand. So, I wanna, I've been I've redone this analysis like 11 times. I would end up repeating myself at least 8 times because it's so tedious to explain. So, I found the best way to facilitate this whole explanation, and that is to show you the core of the combo, or the core of this setup, the line art, if you will. So, I'm going to show you the inputs. Basically, this is the setup without the Doppelganger. Ignore the Doppelganger, pretend he's not there, pretend he doesn't exist, and pretend that you're not holding the Mirage Blade button for the Stormblades, okay? So, basically, I'm gonna show you what to press, and the Doppelganger is just gonna go along with that, because you don't really control the Doppelganger, he just mimics your commands. So, if you practice this in the Void, by yourself, you do it. If you can do this, you're going to be able to do the setup properly. Alright, so this is what happens. After, you summon the Doppelganger, after, you've caught the enemy with Void Slash, use the Stormblades, this is essentially what happens. You switch the Mirage Edge, and you let go of the lock-on, and you use Trick Up. Only to immediately lock on again, and use Air Stinger, which is right plus attack button. However, it's not enough to just press the attack button. You gotta press right and you gotta hold the attack button for a long time. Alright? So, you lock on to use Air Stinger, which is right plus attack button and holding the attack button, but the moment you start Air Stinger, or well, during Air Stinger, you release the lock on and you keep holding right. This is of paramount importance. I cannot stress how incredibly important this is to just pay attention to. So basically, throughout this entire setup, well, not the entire setup, but all the way up until you use Roundtrip, you are not locked on. As you can see, throughout this whole thing, I am not locked on at all. And another thing you'll notice is that I am always holding right. From the moment you use Air Stinger, you keep holding right, and you are not locked on. You let go of the lock on. I cannot stress just how incredibly important this is. It is imperative not to be locked on. So, again, you let go of the lock on to use Trick Up. Now you lock on again, use Air Stinger, right plus holding the attack button. Now you let go of the lock on, you keep holding right, and once you're done with Air Stinger, you still hold it a little, and then you release the attack button, only to immediately start holding it again while holding right. This will cause Vergil to use that reverse Helmbreaker, and once you hit the ground, you keep holding the attack button for about a second, and then you let go of the attack button. All this while being locked off and while holding right. Now, why is that? Remember how when I was talking about reversals, I said that to use the reverse Helmbreaker, you gotta let go of the lock-on and press right plus attack button. That is exactly what happens here. And with the reverse Roundtrip, how do you do that? You let go of the lock-on, you press right, and you hold and release the attack button. So what essentially happens here is you press right and you hold the attack button to use the reverse Helmbreaker, and once you hit the ground, you keep holding the attack button and you keep holding right, and then you release the attack button. All the while, you are holding right and you are not locked on. Okay? This is incredibly important. So that's basically how this works. This is the prototype. This is really, really important. So, like I said, immediately after using Air Stinger, you let go of the attack button, only to immediately start holding it again. And you don't let go of it until you have done the reverse Roundtrip. Okay, so how does the Doppelganger play into all of this? How does the Doppelganger react to all of this? So, let's take a look at the setup, basically. What happens? Ignoring Vergil, now look at the Doppelganger, look at his POV. So, the Doppelganger uses Rising Star to launch the enemy into the air. Then, he does a perfect judgment cut. He teleports to where Vergil is, and he uses a perfect judgment cut to keep the enemy airborne, to prevent them from falling to the ground. When Vergil hits the ground with Helmbreaker and he releases the reverse Roundtrip, in that moment, the Doppelganger will use another perfect judgment cut and he will teleport to where Vergil is. However, you want to cancel this perfect judgment cut by calling the Doppelganger back to your position immediately after letting go of the attack button and unleashing Roundtrip. You know? And then, of course, while Vergil is releasing Roundtrip, you input Rising Star, the Doppelganger will launch the enemy into the air, and then Vergil will use Rapid Slash to go to the other side. The enemy will fall, Vergil will catch the enemy with Void Slash. The Stormblades, you release them, they launch the enemy into the air, the enemy falls, and the Phantom Slash, the Void Slash Explosion Glitch, catches them, and then the reverse Roundtrip comes back to graze them and prevent them from falling to the ground, and then Vergil uses Hell on Earth. That is the idea behind this combo. Not the execution, but the idea. Alright, so now we can analyze this for realsies. So, once you've caught the enemy with Void Slash, you deactivate the Doppelganger, and you immediately summon him again. You summon the Haze Doppelganger, and you input the Stormblades, which is left plus holding the Mirage Blade button. And just like with the previous setup, or well, the first setup, you keep holding the Mirage Blade button. You do not let go of it until it's time to launch the enemy into the air. In my case, my finger is constantly on my right mouse button. In your case, I don't know what your Mirage Blade button is, but you gotta keep holding it throughout this whole setup, alright? So, you input Stormblades, keep holding the Mirage Blade button, you summon the Doppelganger. Now, just like before, we've been over this, we went over the inputs, you switch to the Mirage Edge, you let go of the lock-on, and you use Trick Up, only to immediately lock on again, alright? Now that you're in the air, you use Air Stinger, which is right plus the tag button, but you gotta hold the attack button, okay? Now, why do you gotta hold the attack button? It's very simple. When you are on the left side in midair with the Mirage Edge, right plus attack button is, well, Air Stinger, but the Doppelganger can only use the Yamato. So when you're on the left side on the ground with the Yamato and you press right plus attack button, that is Rapid Slash, and you don't want that. You want the Doppelganger to use Rising Star. So you gotta hold the attack button during Air Stinger. So this will cause the Doppelganger to use Rising Star instead of Rapid Slash, because the Doppelganger copies your inputs. When you're on the left side, on the ground, with the Yamato, which is the only weapon that the Doppelganger can use, and you press right and you hold the attack button, that is Rising Star. This is why you gotta press right and you gotta hold the attack button during Air Stinger. It's so that the Doppelganger can use Rising Star, okay? But, just like I said before, immediately after using Trick Up, you lock on again, and you press right and you hold the attack button to use Air Stinger. But, during Air Stinger, you let go of the lock on, and you keep holding right, and you continue this until the end. Now that you're done with Air Stinger, now that you hit this invisible wall, you release the attack button, only to immediately start holding it again. This will cause the Doppelganger to use a perfect judgment cut. This is what I was talking about earlier. You know, the Doppelganger reacts to you holding the attack button during Air Stinger, and when you release it at the perfect time, he reacts by doing a judgment cut. So he will teleport to where Vergil is and he will use it. At this point, you, like I said, you keep holding right, you're not locked on. Immediately after releasing the attack button, you press it and hold it again to use the reverse Helmbreaker. Now that you're on the ground, you keep holding it a little while holding right, and you finally release it, alright? You release Roundtrip. And Vergil will use this reverse Roundtrip, which will cause the Doppelganger to teleport to a side to use another perfect judgment cut. Because this time, the first perfect judgment cut that the Doppelganger used was because you were holding the attack button during Air Stinger, and then you released it at the perfect time. Right? But the reason the Doppelganger is doing this second perfect judgment cut is because you used Helmbreaker and you were holding the attack button during Helmbreaker, and when you hit the ground, you released the attack button to use Roundtrip, and this, if you had perfect timing, causes the Doppelganger to use another perfect judgment cut, so he teleports to Vergil's location. Just think back to what I was talking about previously when I was talking about the Doppelganger using judgment cuts when you're using the Mirage Edge. So basically, remember how I said you use Air Stinger and you hold the attack button while using Air Stinger, and then you let go of the attack button at the right time, the Doppelganger will use a perfect judgment cut, right? We literally went over that, right? Plus holding the attack button, you release the attack button at some point, the Doppelganger uses a perfect judgment cut. And remember for Helmbreaker, you do the same thing, you know, you hold the attack button while using Helmbreaker, and then once you hit the ground, you release it, the Doppelganger will use another perfect judgment cut, right? So all you gotta do is combine the two. Combine the two judgment cuts, and the way you do that is, I already showed you the line art of the combo, like the core, when I was demonstrating how the combo works without the Doppelganger. You simply press right and you hold the attack button, you keep holding right, and you gotta stay locked off, you release the lock on, and you don't lock back on. So right, and you hold the attack button. After Air Stinger, you release the attack button, and you immediately start holding it again. The Doppelganger does the first perfect judgment cut when you release the attack button after Air Stinger, and then when you immediately start holding the attack button again, and you use Helmbreaker, you finish Helmbreaker, and then when you hit the ground, you wait a little, and you release the reverse Roundtrip. So you release the attack button, and this causes the Doppelganger to use the second perfect judgment cut. However, keep in mind, One thing that you gotta do in this setup, like I said, is the Doppelganger will naturally use the second perfect judgment cut because you were holding the attack button during Helm Breaker and then you released it. However, you don't want that to happen, and the way you prevent that is by calling the Doppelganger back to your position, in my case by pressing V, the moment you release the attack button to unleash this reverse round trip, not before that. Not before that. So, it's pretty simple. The first perfect judgment cut happens when you press right and you hold the attack button and then you release it. The second perfect judgment cut happens when you press and hold the attack button to use Helmbreaker and then you release it to use Roundtrip. Okay? But you gotta cancel the second perfect judgment cut by calling the Doppelganger back to your position by pressing V. So the moment you see that there's something blue next to Vergil, you immediately press V. And you have to do this only after, this is imperative, only after you have let go of the attack button and released Roundtrip. If you call the Doppelganger back to your position before you let go of the attack button, the combo fails. He just goes back and he does a judgment cut or something, doesn't matter. So, again, you let go of the lock-on and you use Trick Up, only to immediately lock on again and use Air Stinger, right plus holding the attack button. While using Air Stinger, you let go of the lock-on and you keep holding right and you keep holding the attack button. Now that you're done with Air Stinger, you let go of the attack button, only to immediately press it and hold it again, all while holding right. This causes the Doppelganger to use the perfect judgment cut. So now, after you've, like I said, you let go of the attack button during Air Stinger, and you immediately press it again and hold it. Vergil will now use a reverse Helmbreaker, and you keep holding right, and you keep holding the attack button. Now that you're on the ground, you hold the attack button for a while longer until your Mirage Edge starts glowing, and when it starts glowing, you release the attack button, and all while holding right, by the way. And Vergil will use this reverse round trip, and the Doppelganger will react to you releasing the attack button, and he will try to use a perfect judgment cut, but the moment you see that there's a blur next to you, you immediately press V, you call the Doppelganger back to your position so that you can cancel his attempt at using this judgment cut. If you don't cancel it, the Doppelganger will use a judgment cut. Alright? And like I said, you only do this after you have released the attack button. At this point, Vergil will release this reverse round trip and the Doppelganger will be right next to him. And now you want to input Rising Star with the Doppelganger. Rising Star, when you're on the right side on the ground with the Yamato, is left plus holding the attack button. So you press left and you hold the attack button and the Doppelganger will use Rising Star to launch the enemy into the air. At this point, you switch to the Yamato and you press left plus attack button to use Rapid Slash. Alright? And Vergil will now use Rapid Slash. At this point, once you're on the other side, just before using Void Slash, like just before using Void Slash, or after the Doppelganger is done with Rising Star, you deactivate the Doppelganger and you immediately use Void Slash yourself, which is back plus forward plus attack button. And Vergil will catch the enemy who is falling like this. At this point, you immediately, after catching the enemy with Void Slash, you immediately switch to Beowulf and you use Hell on Earth. Now, you wait about 1 second, or 1.23 seconds, and you release the Mirage Blade button. So you release the Storm Blades. This will launch the enemy into the air, and now the enemy will fall back, he'll try to fall to the ground, but the Void Slash Explosion glitch, the Phantom Slash, will prevent the enemy from falling to the ground, because it'll graze them. And then, the opponent is going to try and continue falling, but the reverse round trip will come back like a boomerang, and it will graze the enemy once more, preventing them from falling to the ground. By this time, Vergil will have already finished, Hell on Earth, and he will just destroy everything, and that is the end of the Storm combo. Now let's talk about all the issues you can encounter and all the mistakes you can make during this combo. So during the first part of this combo, the first setup, there aren't really a lot of mistakes you can make. So the first thing that I've noticed is sometimes the Doppelganger simply won't use aerial cleave. I don't know if this happens if you try to use aerial cleave way too late. Like, if you're too late in inputting everything, I think that might be the reason why the Doppelganger will sometimes ghost you, but I don't know for sure. All I know is this can happen, but none of these issues during the first part of the combo, the first setup, are that frequent. Sometimes the Doppelganger will not have, like, he will pin the enemy to the ground using aerial cleave, but there will be no bounce up effect. So the way aerial cleave works is you pin the enemy to the ground and the enemy bounces back up. But sometimes that will not be the case. This, I think, has to do with me inputting this way too early. You kind of want to wait a fraction of a millisecond for the enemy to lose an invisible amount of altitude so that, you know, aerial cleave can work properly. So don't input this too early, but also don't do it too late, otherwise the Doppel might ghost you. Of course, this is pure conjecture, this is just me speculating, this might not be why this happens. This is, again, not that frequent, but I guess you could say it's probably the most frequent mistake you can make during this setup. Sometimes, and I think this is what happens, if you cancel Starfall with Trick Up way too early and use Air Stinger way too early, like if you're way too fast, Vergil will be too far away from the enemy, and when you use Helmbreaker, you will hit the enemy with the tip of Helmbreaker, and this will kind of really have insane knockback, and it will blow the enemy away, and the Doppelganger's Void Slash will not connect. This happens if you hit the enemy with the tip of Helmbreaker, but like I said, as you can see, the way I see it, this happens when you cancel Starfall way too early, and you're way too close to the enemy as a result, and when you use Air Stinger way too fast, you're going to be too far away from the enemy, and then when you use Helmbreaker, you will hit the enemy with the tip, and, well, this happens. Sometimes, though, and this is incredibly rare, you will do it too late. So here you can see I use Starfall, and I almost hit the ground, right? I don't cancel it early enough. So I cancel Starfall too late with Trick Up, and when I use Air Stinger, I don't go behind the enemy. I do this. So make sure you cancel Trick Up, you cancel Starfall with Trick Up earlier, not too early. If you do it too early, you'll experience that previous issue where you hit the enemy with the tip, but this is even worse because you didn't cancel it in time and you almost hit the ground. So actually, no, this is not worse. The combo can, funnily enough, still work this way, but if you make that previous mistake, it's over. That's literally it. These are the only 4 mistakes that you can make, or well, the 4 issues you can encounter during the first setup. At least that's how it was for me. Now let's move on to the second setup. So I didn't have much trouble with the second setup, really. At least not now. There are some issues that would keep bothering me, but they were different. I'll talk about it. So the first thing can happen, this happened a few times, but it's really rare. It's incredibly rare. Don't worry about it. I'm clearly on the ground, right? I go into my Sin DT. I summon the Doppelganger. I summon him, and he is in the air. He's not on the ground. He is in midair, and when I start mashing, he does aerial rave. Why? Is this a stage thing? Because this library stage is kind of uneven. I don't know, but this isn't even a mistake. This is clearly an issue. You can't account for this. I was on the ground when I summoned the Doppelganger. Now here you can see how I didn't mash enough during the first 2 hits of Beowulf Combo B. What essentially ended up happening was I pressed the attack button 3 times instead of 4 to 5 times, and then I made a pause. As a result, Vergil only ended up using 1 hit of Beowulf Combo B, and the Doppelganger ended up using only 2 hits of Yamato Combo C. I should have pressed the attack button 4 or 5 times, right? Not 3. So in all these instances, you can see the same thing. I don't mash enough, and as a result, Vergil only does 1 hit. Here you can see, though, how I mashed way too much. I pressed the attack button 5 times before making the pause, and as a result, Vergil ended up using Beowulf Combo A instead of Combo B. So, yeah, press the attack button 4 times if possible. Like, don't mash too much, otherwise this can happen. Very rare, though. Now this is curious, bro. Here, the pause I made wasn't long enough somehow. I pressed the attack button 4 times and I made a pause, and when I resumed mashing, the Doppelganger used Yamato Combo A! Yamato Combo A is mashing the attack button like a maniac without making any pause. I clearly made a very lengthy pause after the 4th hit. Why is the Doppelganger using Yamato Combo A? This makes no sense, and this happened multiple times. Most of these input problems are not frequent, but they can still happen. I guess the pause really wasn't long enough somehow. But guess what? Sometimes the pause is somehow way too long, and as a result, Vergil ends up resetting Beowulf Combo B. And usually the Doppelganger doesn't reset Yamato Combo C. The pause is good enough for that, but it's not good enough for Beowulf Combo B. So the pause I made was way too long. I should have made it shorter. But then you run the risk of the Doppelganger using Yamato Combo A, so it's like pick your poison, right? Luckily, I have the timing down now, but you really gotta have perfect timing for this. As you can see in all these instances, there are multiple instances. Vergil basically resets Beowulf Combo B because the pause was way too long. Alright, and now we got these two issues. These two are kind of connected. And one of them you could say is a non-issue, but the other one is by far, and I'm not joking, the most frequent issue in the entire combo. The first one is the enemy falls to the ground during the Yamato Combo C/Barrage, or before it. Now, this happens if you wait too long before using Beowulf Combo B and Yamato Combo C with the Doppelganger, because, you know, you can choose when to do it. It depends on how fast you summon the Doppelganger, how fast you use Rapid Slash, how fast you start mashing with Beowulf Combo B. It depends on all these things, right? So, the moment you use Roundtrip, right? Because Roundtrip lasts for a couple of seconds. You gotta use Starfall really fast, you gotta use Trick Down really fast, you gotta summon the Doppelganger real fast, you gotta use Rapid Slash real fast, and you gotta start mashing with Beowulf real fast. If you wait too long, the enemy falls to the ground. Now I would personally advise you not to care about this, and to treat this as a non-issue. Because it really isn't an issue, and it happens more frequently than it doesn't, if you know what I mean. But there is another issue that is even worse, and that issue is the final hit of Yamato Combo C does not connect. The /flurry, you know, the enemy loses altitude too slowly, and, you know, Yamato Combo C has a really weird hitbox. This /barrage can catch you, and the final hit can disconnect. This happened in the Nocturnal combo, this happened in the Spiral combo, this happened with so many combos. The final hit of Yamato Combo C simply doesn't connect, because the enemy is too high up on the /flurry. Now, this can happen if you do everything too soon. If you use Starfall way too soon, if you use Trick Down way too soon, if you summon the Doppelganger, use Rapid Slash way too soon, and if you start mashing way too soon. If you're speedrunning things, this can happen. So, my advice would be to wait. But, if you wait too long, the enemy might fall to the ground. I gotta say, this depends on so many things. First of all, it depends on how close the enemy is to the ground when you use Roundtrip. Because you can use Roundtrip immediately after Air Stinger, or you can wait for Vergil to lose some altitude and then use Starfall. And this will depend. If the enemy is closer to the ground, and Roundtrip is closer to the ground, they're going to lose altitude faster. So in that case, you might want to start mashing fast. But if the enemy is really high up, if you use Roundtrip really, really early after Air Stinger, you didn't wait for Vergil to lose a lot of altitude, then you might want to wait. But maybe not. It is almost random. I know it's not, but you gotta have a feeling for it. And it is absolutely impossible for me to explain to you how to do this, because truth be told, if I try this combo right now, there is probably a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. Like, I would get 6 or 7 out of 10 attempts wrong. I am pretty sure, even now. Even now. So it's like, pick your poison. To be completely honest, at least if the enemy falls to the ground, the combo is feasible. But if he's caught by the combo C slashes, it's over. It just doesn't work. Sometimes the enemy will fall to the ground while on the slash barrage, which is even more annoying. But hey, whatever. Now, remember how I said how during the penultimate hit, like just before the last hit of Beowulf combo B, you gotta press and hold right so that you can be aligned with the Doppelganger. This is what happens if you don't hold right. Either you will miss completely, or in this case, you will barely connect. Like, the final hit of Beowulf combo B will barely connect, and as a result, Void Slash will not be able to reach the enemy because you're too far away, and this causes problems later anyway. Well, the combo fails here, basically. Sometimes I'll release the final hit of Beowulf combo B way too late, like the Tetsuzanko, and as a result, the enemy kind of flies past me. Sometimes, even though I am holding right, even though I try to align myself with the Doppelganger, the enemy still ends up flying past me. And this happened more times than I can count. It is absolutely aggravating. Excruciatingly so. Like, I don't know, man. It's just really annoying. But that's not all. See, sometimes, the Doppelganger will use a perfect judgment cut during Tetsuzanko. This happened a total of 3 times, I'd say. Really not frequent. This has to do with how I was holding and releasing the attack button. It's a timing issue and it's really, really weird. Don't worry about this, it probably won't happen to you. So I talked about how releasing the Tetsuzanko too late is, well, bad because then the enemy flies past you and it's over. But why do you think I was holding the Tetsuzanko for so long and why I was reluctant to time it properly? It's because of this. Sometimes you can end up releasing the Tetsuzanko way too early. Like, way too early, before the enemy is close enough to Vergil. What happens in that case? What happens is this. I try to use Void Slash, and I sometimes can't, but sometimes I can. Barely, though. I use Air Stinger, I use everything, and now I'm supposed to use Rapid Slash, right? But Rapid Slash takes me way too far, and I cannot connect Void Slash. Think of it this way. I'm on the right side, on the ground, and I'm incredibly close to the enemy. When I use Rapid Slash to cut through the enemy, Rapid Slash will take me very far away from the enemy. And when I try to use Void Slash, the Void Slash will obviously not connect because I'm too far away from the enemy. And the reason I'm so far away from the enemy is because I was too close to the enemy before I used Rapid Slash. But let's say I'm farther away from the enemy. Like, I'm also on the right side, and I'm farther away from the enemy, and I want to use Rapid Slash. As a result, Vergil will cut through the enemy, but he will be close enough to them so that when I try and use Void Slash will actually connect. So this is why you want the enemy to be really close to you when you catch them with Void Slash. Because if you release the Tetsuzanko way too early, 2 things can happen. Number 1, you try to use Void Slash, but the enemy is so far away from you that you can't even connect Void Slash at all, and the enemy falls to the ground. Really likely, but that only happens if you release the Tetsuzanko way too early. However, the most likely scenario, if you release the Tetsuzanko early, the final hit of Beowulf combo B, is you try to use Void Slash, and you will barely connect it. You will barely manage to connect Void Slash. And now, when you use Trick Up and you use Air Stinger, and then Helm Breaker, the Air Stinger will take Vergil kind of like close to the enemy when you use Helm Breaker, and then when you try to use Rapid Slash, and then subsequently use Void Slash will not connect. Alright? And this all happened because you were too close to the enemy after Helmbreaker. And the reason you were so close to the enemy after Helmbreaker is because Air Stinger didn't take you far enough. And why did Air Stinger not take you far enough? It's because you were too far away from the enemy before you used Void Slash. And why were you too far away from the enemy before you used Void Slash? It's because you released the Tetsuzanko way too early. You gotta release it in time. If you're too late, the enemy flies past Vergil and it's over. But if you release it way too early, either Void Slash doesn't connect at all and the combo fails, or it connects but barely, and then when you use Rapid Slash and you try to use Void Slash, you'll be too far away and Void Slash will simply not connect. If you can gauge, like sometimes you'll see that I just drop the setup because I can already calculate that it's not going to work. If you notice that the enemy is too far away from you, when you start the final setup, just drop it. It's not going to work. This is why releasing the Tetsuzanko too early is a huge mistake. Oh, and one more thing regarding the second setup. It's got to do with inputs. So when I came back to this combo, because the original combo was from October, and I literally came back to it like a few weeks ago, and I had absolutely no trouble at all during the second part of the combo when it came to inputs. The only problems I experienced were, well, the ones in the latter half of this section where I talk about how, you know, the enemy would fly past me, or I would release the Tetsuzanko too early or too late, yada yada yada. But in terms of inputs, I never had any issues at all. By inputs, I mean, you know, Vergil resetting Beowulf combo B, or the Doppelganger resetting Yamato combo C, or the Doppelganger using Yamato combo A instead of Yamato combo C, or Vergil only using one hit of Beowulf combo B, or using Beowulf combo A instead of combo B. I did not, like, experience any of these issues when I came back to this combo. But now, I tried redoing it again, and all of a sudden, I started experiencing these issues again that I only experienced in October, which means that, like, the conclusion that I've reached right now is that you really need to have perfect timing here. The pause you make is really crucial. It cannot be too long, but it also can't be too short. Also, remember that one example where I pressed the attack button 5 times and Vergil ended up doing, like, Beowulf combo A instead of combo B? Yeah, well, check this out. In this example, right here, I pressed the attack button 6 times, so I mash 6 times. Then I make a pause, I continue mashing, and Vergil ends up doing Beowulf combo B, and not combo A. But in that previous example, I pressed the attack button 5 times, not 6 times, and Vergil ended up using Beowulf combo A instead of combo B. So it's like, what gives? Well, let me tell you. When it comes to these kinds of setups, usually, you know, where the Doppelganger is doing one thing and Vergil is doing another, usually combo C or Aerial Rave B or Yamato combo A, B, C, you know, doesn't matter. It's never about the number of times that you press a button. It's never about the amount. It's not about how much you mash. It's about how fast you mash. It's about when you start mashing and when you stop and how long the pause is. Those are the most important things. These numbers you're seeing are irrelevant. It doesn't matter how many times I'm pressing the attack button. There's a way to use Beowulf combo B by pressing, like, you can use the first 2 hits of Beowulf combo B by pressing the attack button 2 times. But you could do it, you could also do it by pressing the attack button 6 times. Same with Yamato combo C. You can literally mash the attack button 4 times, or you could do it 8 times or 6 times before making the pause. It is completely irrelevant. It's not about the number. It's all about when you start mashing. Look closely at this example where I, pressed the attack button 6 times. What do you notice? You notice that I basically pressed the attack button One time, two times, and Vergil doesn't react. And then he reacts to the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth hit. So it's like I basically pressed the attack button 4 times. Why is that? It's because I started mashing way too early. After using Rapid Slash, Vergil assumes this stance, and during the first few frames, he doesn't react to any melee commands, right? Which is why you want to wait. So now we know that Vergil basically didn't react to the first 2 hits, the first 2 presses of the attack button, because I started mashing way too early. Now let's go back to that other example where I pressed the attack button 5 times and he ended up using Beowulf combo A. You can see that in this example, I waited a long time, and then I pressed the attack button 5 times. So here you can see that it's not about the number of times you press the attack button, it is all about when you start mashing. So if you wanna, I would advise you to wait. After using Rapid Slash, wait for Vergil, wait about half a second, approximately, for Vergil to, kind of cool off so that he can start reacting to your commands. If you start mashing immediately after assuming this stance, you gotta press the attack button more than 4 times. You gotta press it 6 times, or maybe even more. So, this is what I'm talking about. It's not about the number, it's about how fast you mash, it's about when you mash, and when you start, when you stop, and most importantly, it's about how fast the pause is. Of course, you already know this. If you don't press right before the final hit of Beowulf combo B, the enemy and the Doppelganger will not be aligned most of the time, and this will happen. But sometimes, you don't have to do it. It depends. You're gonna have to gauge yourself. Alright, and now we got all the issues you can encounter and all the mistakes you can make during the final setup. So the first thing can happen, and this only happened once, I don't know if this is even worth including, but one time the Doppelganger completely ghosted my inputs. This can happen, I guess. Probably not, it's like a one-time thing, so yeah. Here you can see how I wasn't holding the attack button long enough during Helmbreaker, and as a result, well, no reverse round trip. For round trip to work, for round trip to come out, you gotta press and hold the attack button and only release it after your Mirage Edge has started glowing. So you gotta hold it for a longer period of time. Here, I let go of the attack button way too early after using Helmbreaker. I should have held it for a longer time before releasing it. Here you can see multiple examples where there was no reverse round trip. Instead, the round trip faced the enemy. This is why, during the analysis of this final setup, I was so adamant about, I place such a huge emphasis on the fact that you gotta let go of the lock-on and keep holding right throughout the entire setup almost, until you call the Doppelganger back to your position. So you press, you let go of the lock-on, you hold right so you can use the reverse Helmbreaker, and then you keep holding right, and you hold the attack button, and then you release it to use the reverse round trip. But here you can see how at the very end, I stopped holding right, and what I did was I locked on. Look at this. You can see it right here. I locked on. And that was game over. So really, this only happened to me during the first, attempts when I was just starting, learning this setup and how it worked. I made some really weird rookie mistakes, but that was not the case later. Here you can see how I wasn't holding the attack button during Air Stinger, or I was, but not long enough, and as a result, the Doppelganger didn't use a perfect judgment cut. Like I said, during Air Stinger, you hold the attack button for a long time, and then when you are done with Air Stinger, you hit this invisible wall, that's when you release the attack button. If you don't do that, the Doppelganger will not use a perfect judgment cut. However, if you hold the attack button too long during Air Stinger before releasing it, the Doppelganger will use a regular judgment cut. So if you don't hold the attack button long enough, no judgment cut. If you hold it too long, regular judgment cut. So you need to have that perfect timing. And this doesn't just apply to Air Stinger, this also applies to Helmbreaker. If you don't hold the attack button long enough during Helmbreaker, there's no judgment cut. If you hold it too long before releasing it, then that's a regular judgment cut. So for both of these, you need to hold the attack button and release it at the right time. You need to have that perfect timing. Now we have the 4 main mistakes, alright? The first 2, I don't even know why I'm going to mention them, but I guess I should. So here you can see how I do everything perfectly, and I'm about to use, I'm holding the attack button, I use Helmbreaker, and now I use the reverse Roundtrip, right? But I didn't call the Doppelganger back to my position at all. I didn't call him back. Instead, he did a second perfect judgment cut when I released the Roundtrip. Why is that? So the reason he did the first perfect judgment cut was because I was holding the attack button during Air Stinger and then I released it. See? But the reason he did the second perfect judgment cut was because immediately after releasing the attack button for after Air Stinger, I had to press it and hold it again to use this reverse Helmbreaker. And then I hit the ground, and then I released the attack button again for this reverse Roundtrip, and he did another perfect judgment cut. He teleported to where I was because my timing was so perfect. This is what I discussed at the very start, when I was basically, getting things out of the way before analyzing this setup. So this is essentially what happens. I didn't call the Doppelganger back to my position. That's my problem here. I let him do his perfect judgment cut. See, he does this regardless. I'll talk about this later. So I was supposed, immediately after letting go of the attack button to use this Roundtrip, I should have immediately pressed V to call the Doppelganger back to my position. This would have canceled his perfect judgment cut. But this way, I didn't press V, I didn't call him back to my position, and he teleported to my position, and he did a perfect judgment cut. Sometimes, however, the same thing would happen. I don't call the Doppelganger back to my position, but instead of using a perfect judgment cut, he does a regular judgment cut. Now, why is that? So he does the first perfect judgment cut because I, was holding the attack button during Air Stinger, and then I released it. And then I immediately pressed the attack button again to hold it, to use the reverse Helmbreaker, but I'm holding it for too long before releasing it. And then I use Roundtrip, and he does another judgment cut, but it's a regular judgment cut. You can tell that it's regular by the fact that he doesn't teleport to my position. He does it in the air. He just does one perfect judgment cut in the air, followed by another regular judgment cut. This is because my timing was off here. See, I waited too long before releasing Roundtrip, and as a result, he didn't teleport to my location to use a perfect judgment cut. So that's a problem. What you want, actually, is for the previous thing to happen. You want your timing to be perfect when you release Roundtrip. But the moment the Doppelganger attempts to use a perfect judgment cut and teleport to where you are, you gotta immediately call him back to your position to cancel his perfect judgment cut. But okay, in both of these examples, I forgot to call the Doppelganger back to my position. I didn't press V at all. In one example, he used a perfect judgment cut. In the other, though, he used a regular judgment cut because I took too long before releasing the attack button. But in these two examples, in these two instances, well, there are multiple examples, I did something else. In this example, forever, I call the Doppelganger back to my position, but he did a perfect judgment cut regardless. Now, why is that? So, like before, he did the first perfect judgment cut because I was holding the attack button during Air Stinger and then I released it. But then I immediately start holding the attack button again to use Helmbreaker, and then, check this out, I call the Doppelganger back to my position, and then I let go of the attack button to use Roundtrip, and he does another judgment cut. And in all of these examples, you'll see the same exact thing. I call the Doppelganger back to my position before letting go of the attack button, before releasing the Roundtrip. This is basically catastrophic. Do not do this under any circumstance. You have to let go of the attack button first to release the round trip. And your timing needs to be perfect. The moment you see that there's something blue next to you, you press V to call the doppelganger back to your position and cancel his perfect judgment cut. But in these examples, I call the doppelganger back to my position before I even release round trip, and as a result, he does a judgment cut. But in those previous examples, the way I see it, the doppelganger would end up using a perfect judgment cut. Doesn't matter, I mean, it still failed, but you know. However, in these examples that you're about to see, the doppelganger ends up using a regular judgment cut. So same thing, he does a perfect judgment cut, I hold the attack button, and I call him back to my position before releasing round trip. But I take too long before releasing round trip. I hold the attack button too long, and then when I release it, the doppelganger does a regular judgment cut. And this happens a lot. So in the previous examples, yes, like, I call the doppelganger back to my position before releasing round trip, before releasing the attack button. But my timing was perfect, so the doppelganger would end up teleporting to me, and he would use a perfect judgment cut. But here, I take too long, I hold the attack button too long before releasing it, and the doppelganger takes a step back and he uses a regular judgment cut. Keep in mind, with regular judgment cuts, you usually gotta hold the attack button for a very long time before releasing it. But for perfect judgment cuts, your timing needs to be perfect. You don't need to hold the attack button that long. It needs to be shorter. You see this, for example, here in Rapid Slash, right? Like, the longer you hold it before releasing it, the worse it is. It's almost a given that you're going to use a regular judgment cut if you take that long. So, yeah. Basically, your timing simply needs to be perfect. That whole thing, you know, where the doppelganger uses the second perfect judgment cut, you actually want that. The only thing you gotta change about that is that you don't want the doppelganger to actually use the perfect judgment cut. You want to cancel that judgment cut before it even comes out, the moment the doppelganger teleports to where Vergil is. And you do this by calling the doppelganger back to your position immediately, but only after you have let go of the attack button to use round trip. So first you let go of the attack button, then you call the doppelganger back. Alright, that is imperative. And the reason I'm saying this is because, well, let me explain. You can actually cancel the doppelganger's judgment cut at almost any point. So look at this. Let me show you this. Look at, for example, aerial cleave, right? Here, me and the doppelganger, we both use aerial cleave, and we both use a perfect judgment cut. But here, I use aerial cleave with the doppelganger, and he's about to use the perfect judgment cut, but I call him back to my position, and this cancels the perfect judgment cut that he was about to use. Like, you can pay close attention, he just stays there, right? Like, he doesn't do a judgment cut with me because I canceled it by calling him back to my position. And that is the same exact thing you want to do here. You want to call the doppelganger back to your position the moment you use this round trip, the moment you release the attack button, and as he's about to use this perfect judgment cut, look at him. Just look at this like it's in slow motion. I cancel it. He's back, and I call him back to my position, and he turns into a blur. Like, you can see that he's about to use a perfect judgment cut. He's assuming the stance, but then I cancel it by calling him back to my position. So the doppelganger will use a perfect judgment cut no matter what you do if your timing is perfect for the round trip release. But the thing is, you have to cancel it by calling him back to your position, but not before you've let go of the attack button. First you let go of the attack button to release round trip, and then you call him back to your position. He will go back to your position anyway, because he will use the perfect judgment cut. But what you want to do is you want to cancel that before he can do it. So this is a mistake that happened quite a few times. If you don't deactivate the doppelganger immediately after he's done with Rising Star, he might end up using aerial cleave. For example, in this scenario, he does Rising Star, and I use Rapid Slash, right? And now I press back plus forward plus attack button, right? And he reacts to me pressing forward plus attack button. He is behind the enemy with the Yamato. If you are behind the enemy in midair with the Yamato, forward plus attack button is aerial cleave. And since Void Slash is back plus forward plus attack button, the Doppelganger reacts to the final two inputs, which is forward plus attack button, and he uses aerial cleave, right? So, you gotta deactivate the Doppelganger the moment he is done with Rising Star. However, the thing is, Cat actually pressed the attack button one more time. Like, I think in his version of the combo, the Doppelganger does one hit of Aerial Rave, and then he deactivates him. And sure enough, you can see how in the original combo, the enemy kind of falls to the ground almost before I can catch him with Void Slash, but in other examples, that's not the case. So, my honest advice to you is don't deactivate the Doppelganger way too early. Deactivate him just before you press back plus forward plus attack button. That is guaranteed to work, and this is the result right here. It's perfect. In the original combo that I uploaded, I kind of deactivated him a bit too early, so the enemy kind of fell to the ground. It's no biggie, but you know what I mean. Ah, yes, this is the dumbest thing can happen. Vergil ends up using Rapid Slash instead of Void Slash. Twice. So he does two Rapid Slashes. So he does the first one, which is required, and then I press back plus forward plus attack button. He does the second one. Camera issue, by the way. I should have moved my mouse. The camera was kind of facing the enemy forward, so when I pressed forward plus attack button, Vergil ended up using Rapid Slash once again. Definitely on my part, but it's also pretty annoying because... So now we're getting to the last four mistakes/issues you can encounter. You can sometimes release the Stormblades way too early. This is a mistake I made so many times when I was starting this combo. If you release the Stormblades immediately after catching the enemy with Void Slash, not waiting at all, what's going to happen is the enemy will fall to the ground even before the Void Slash explosion. So before the Void Slash explosion can graze them, they're already on the ground and it's GG. You failed. Congratulations, you played yourself. However, sometimes you can release the Stormblades a little too late. A little. What happens then? What usually happens is, the Void Slash explosion, Phantom Slash does graze the enemy, but the Roundtrip doesn't. It goes underneath the enemy and, well, it's completely useless, right? It doesn't serve its function, which is the highlight of the combo. You can see this in like 5 or 6 or 7 different attempts, like different instances, where I let go of the Stormblades way too late. The explosion does work, but the Roundtrip is rendered completely useless. It serves no function here, because the enemy isn't low enough for him to... You get the point. So don't release the Stormblades too early, but definitely not too late. Sometimes, though, my timing would be so peculiar, pun intended, that in the end what would happen is, like, both the Void Slash explosion and Roundtrip would hit the enemy at the same exact time. This happened more times than I can think at this point, but for some reason I only have this one recording, so yeah. And finally, we got the last issue. Can you guess what it is? Can you guess? Come on, take a wild guess. What is it? You already know. Air Trick instead of Hell on Earth. So this happened, I think, a billion times. Imagine getting to the end of this combo, which is not really easy, and you just switch to Beowulf, and you press forward plus trig button plus attack button. You press that, but the game says, nah, chief, you pressed lock on plus trig button. And instead of using Hell on Earth, Vergil ends up teleporting to the enemy with Air Trick. Yeah, That can certainly happen. And it is by far the most annoying issue you can experience. And this is something that happens with almost every combo that ends with an ultimate. Possibly, I would argue, the most frequent issue you can experience with the last setup. Yes, even more frequent than that whole thing with the doppelganger being called back to you. Because if you know what you're doing, if you have perfect timing, you hold the attack button properly, you do everything properly, you're not going to have a problem. You're going to call the doppelganger back to your position after you've done round trip, before he does the perfect judgment cut. You cancel, you do everything perfectly. 99% of the time, this is going to be the most frequent issue you will experience. And yes, it's an issue, you already know, probably a camera thing, I don't know. I wish there was a way to just have one dedicated button that works from any camera angle without lock on, and it triggers the ultimate that you want. I'm so tired of this, man. You have no idea how many failed attempts I had where this would happen. So yeah, that is the Storm combo. It is, like I said, one of my favorite combos. It is incredibly good. I really like it. And this is not me, I don't like self-aggrandizing. I don't like doing that. In fact, I'm more prone to self-deprecating. But I really think this combo is cute. I think it's really nice. And I like how it flows. I like all the setups in it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. See ya, peace out, and have a good one.
Rest in peace. Now I'm a little motivated. Fly! Get lost! Scum. Rest in peace. Now I'm a little motivated.